a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Amazing Arizonans with Mike Broomhead.
Joining me in studio is former Governor Doug Ducey. First of all, welcome.
Good to be here, Mike.
It's nice to see you casual.
Good to be back. This is the first time I've ever driven myself here.
Really?
I had a tough time finding it.
That's going to be a part of this. I want to talk about all that time as governor, but I've been privileged to know you since before you were the state treasurer. Your story has always been compelling to me because you've always been so invested in the community, the Thunderbirds, and all the charitable things you did. What was it about your life that motivated you from your beginnings at ASU to Cold Stone Creamery? What motivated you into public service?
Well, I would say I came from a family of service. My dad was a cop, and on the side of his car that he would park in our driveway and kind of come up behind my brother and I and turn on the flashers and scare all our buddies in grade school. It said to protect and serve. So that was definitely something that was part of my youth and something I had a lot of affection for. But I would say it was more, my journey was more of an entrepreneurial journey. I went into business, started my career at Procter & Gamble. We began Cold Stone Creamery here in Tempe, Arizona, on the southwest corner of Southern and McClintock. So it was really post Cold Stone. It was selling Cold Stone really at an early age, and seeing that I was so fortunate for my family to come from Toledo out west and all the good things that were happening in Arizona. And I didn't think that Arizona had the reputation that it deserved nationally. I thought this is the best kept secret in the country. I wanted to be the chief spokesperson and chief salesperson for the state. And that's really what motivated me to do it, because I just thought it was such a wonderful place to be. And I think a lot of good things happen with growth. And that's really what I had done in my business career. I drove revenue, and I was naive when I made the decision to get into politics. I'd never been to Washington, D.C. I'd never been down to the state capitol. I just thought that we were in need of some leadership, and I also thought the state was suffering from a bit of an inferiority complex, looking at other places and thinking that they were better or that we couldn't be competitive. And my mindset was, why can't we be competitive? And I think we've demonstrated that we can compete or beat anybody in the nation.
So going back to your Cold Stone days, how old were you when you started?
On the franchising side of it, I was 33.
When and how did you make the decision? What drove you to say, we've got something here that can be a lot bigger than it is right now?
Well, I wanted to be in business for myself, and I was actually looking at other concepts, really good concepts. Things like Subway, which, they've got tens of thousands of stores all over the country. I actually was checking out Ben & Jerry's as well, because I love Chunky Monkey. Every time we went on vacation, I just thought they had the best packaged goods inside the store, and that wasn't available. But there was a guy here, Don Sutherland, who opened the first store at Southern and McClintock, and he was thinking of franchising. And I was with Procter & Gamble, but I was on the food service side of the business. That was what they called the stepchild division. Mm-hmm. It was a $1 billion division in a $30 billion company, but was all the stuff that Procter sold that wasn't in the grocery stores. So I was dealing with restaurants, distributors, hospitals, and service outlets. And I, of course, had franchise customers. And I saw who the good franchisors were and who the bad franchisors were. And there were people that wanted to open that as a franchise. So there was an investment in what turned out to be the first franchise beyond the licensing, which was at 83rd Avenue and the 101, which was a cotton field when we signed that lease. And that next 10 years, we built over 1,440 stores, all 50 states. Today it operates in 31 countries around the world, and it seems like just yesterday that we were in the office in Gilbert and shorts and T-shirts and, unloading compressors.
When did it dawn on you that you were this baron of business. I mean, you were kind of the standard for a lot of people in these franchises. When did you figure out that you went from, man, I hope this works, to people are modeling themselves after us?
It took a while. I'd been in the comfort of the corporate cocoon, and when I left Procter & Gamble, they made quite an effort to try to keep me there. And I wanted to do something. I wanted to come here, and I didn't want to chase my career all around the country. And in those days, the way to really achieve top-level management was to go to China for some time and build a brand over there. And, that may have sounded sexy. Our relationship with China was different back 30 years ago. But as I was getting to the point where we wanted to start a family, I thought, I don't want to raise kids in Shanghai or Beijing. So the choice was really Toledo, where I grew up, or Tempe, where I met Angela.
Right.
And so Tempe won. We came to Arizona, and I did look in those days. You read the paper, and the classified showed what jobs were available. There weren't a lot of corporations in town, but I was thinking, was it the right thing? I was second guessing a little bit on was it the right thing to leave P&G. I only suffered that maybe for 30 minutes on a Sunday as I looked through the classifieds. Luckily, there was no really good job out there, so I got up every morning. We focused on being the first to best locations and leading all competitors in unit development. And I had seen at Procter & Gamble, my brand was Folgers. And I was able to see what happened with, we won a lot of awards. We were able to really build that brand outside of the grocery store. And if you remember, it wasn't that long ago, people didn't go out and order a brand of coffee.
Right.
They just walked in a restaurant and said, I'll have a cup of coffee.
Sure.
So I was the one taking that off the grocery store shelves and talking to restaurateurs in Los Angeles if they want to do that. And this was the number one best-selling coffee in the world. It was an easy yes. And I had an objective in my first quarter to sell 40 accounts. I sold 400, and all of a sudden I was taking on more responsibility than anyone in the company at my age. So I had this confidence that you could go into a commodity, which is what ice cream was. You could make it better in a super premium category. By that time, Ben & Jerry's and Haagen-Dazs had fled retail outlets and gone to the grocery stores. And we had Dairy Queen, Baskin-Robbins, and 3,300 TCBYs. So we really went out there and we took down those locations. We actually drafted behind Starbucks for a lot of it. Landlords love Starbucks. They light up a center in the morning. Cold Stone lit up centers in the evening. And there aren't many family-friendly things that light up centers in the evening. And that's why I think we were able to have such rapid growth. It was good timing, and it was a plan.
So that I just have to ask, you said Ben & Jerry's and Chunky Monkey, but Cold Stone, what's your favorite?
Well, I love all the chocolate. I'd say I love everything at Cold Stone, and believe it or not, Baskin-Robbins was 31 flavors.
Yeah.
And 31 flavors, it was one flavor for each day of the month.
Yeah.
And that was considered a lot. What Cold Stone did is basically exponential number of flavors because of the combinations. So I think that's what was really allowed people to customize and personalize their own ice cream. There were just three things that I was always in search of. I always thought the Chunky Monkey, the chocolate that Ben & Jerry's was a special combination. I always thought Baskin-Robbins had an incredible pistachio. Or I'm sorry, mint chocolate chip.
Yeah.
Mint chocolate chip. And then Friendly ice cream, which is back in the Midwest, they had pistachio. So we always have to sample competitors, but those are the ones I always got when we were traveling.
Didn't you have a concept in the stores? Don't they have a concept where guests make up a recipe and sometimes they end up on the wall?
For sure. We had those personalized recipes. We actually had a guy, Ray Karam, and he was our taste master. He was basically a food scientist.
Now that's a job. I mean, how
What
did
a
you get
job.
that job?
And he reveled in the job, too. And I still have a white coat, which is what he wore every day. It's a Ray Karam Taste Master with the Cold Stone logo. And we came up with a couple new flavors. Cotton candy was one that kids loved, and that was not a new flavor, but the cookie dough was.
Yeah.
It was the first new flavor introduced in ice cream since cookies and cream, and that was one of our top sellers. So that was a lot of fun. But basically, ice cream lovers kind of stick in the chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, spumoni type thing, and then of course the mix-ins and the candies, fruits, and nuts and toppings was where a lot of the secret was. But also the singing in the store, the culture that we had. I think we were the best best place in the country for teenagers to work. We wanted teenagers, and not teenagers that could work 40 hours a week, teenagers that could work 10 hours a week, and they were active in school and cared about their grades and had a social life. And they brought a lot of energy to the store. They started singing in the stores. Yeah. When the lines got long, people would tip. So not only would they make their hourly wage, but a lot of times on a Saturday or Sunday night, they'd leave with $40 or $50 in their pocket. So we really got the cream of the crop.
So let's take that forward to the public life, because you ran, and I don't know if this was planned ahead of time, but you won a statewide race. You became the state treasurer. Was it your business acumen and your business sense? What made that office attractive to you? Because it was a statewide, or because it was treasurer?
Well, I'd never been to Washington, D.C. I sold Cold Stone, and I went back on a YPO, Young Presidents Organization, educational trip. And I was really fascinated about how much was going on that I was unaware of, because I'd just been working since I was 16. And I had the bug to run for office. When I came back, I went and visited with Senator Kyle. I'd never met him, never written him a check. Man. Unbelievable. And he taught me a real lesson here. I thought I'd get 15 minutes with him. He gave me 90 minutes. He encouraged me to run for governor. He walked me around his office. He introduced me to the people that he was working with. He was soon to be retiring. And I wanted to be the governor. I wanted to run for governor, but there was no opening for governor. And if you remember, Dean Martin,
I do,
made a decision to primary Jan Brewer, who had ascended to the governor's office when Janet Napolitano left to be in Barack Obama's cabinet. Governor Brewer inherited a huge deficit, had to make very difficult decisions in the role of chief executive, and Dean Martin made the decision that he was going to primary her. And I think there were a couple other guys that did that too, John Munger, Buzz Mills, but it opened the treasurer's office. Yeah. And I had studied finance. I considered myself, of course, a businessman. It was an executive office, and I thought this would be a way to run for office, to serve the state, to see if I liked it, and to see if I could make a difference. I also thought it would be a way for me to get smart on the budget and policy, which I didn't know much about. And it really turned out to be true. The treasurer's position is an important position. I think we managed $13 billion in assets. We did the first portfolio review in the history of the office and did some different asset allocations. And it put me in a position, if you remember, I fought Prop 204. It was a 1 cent sales tax. They tried to, I thought, deceive the voters in some way. It was a temporary tax to get through that huge deficit that was inherited. And some folks put it out there as, we'll just continue it. Well, it was meant to be temporary. That's what the commitment was to the citizens. It does sound easy to just pay a penny that you're already paying. So it was polling very high, the tax increase. It was, I think, 65-35. I made the decision to challenge it and got out all over the state, just like I did when I was running for treasurer. But I had to try to persuade people that this was a bad idea, that it was unnecessary, and the state had the right resources. And we won on Election Day 65-35. So that gave me the confidence that, hey, you can get out, make your case, get in front of the people. And I wanted to do it on a larger policy set in the governor's office. And 2 years later, I did.
Did it teach you about campaigning? Because running for a district, whether it's in the Arizona House or Senate, or running for a district in the House of Representatives in D.C. is one thing. But to have to run as a senator or as a governor or as a treasurer, that's a statewide race. And you got to cross all four corners of the state. You're speaking to different groups of people. Did you learn a lot from that helped you run for governor?
Oh, you learn a ton. You learn a ton. It is very awkward the first time you do it. I remember the first event was at the Mauna Lucia. At the corner. It was just a Republican women's event, and I live not too far from there at Tatum and Lincoln, and I was thinking, I'm walking into this event. I could just go home. Why am I doing this? But I wanted to do it. I wanted to get involved in public policy. Like I said, I thought the state should be profiled a lot better than it was. And you walk in there and you start shaking hands. I'm Doug Ducey running for treasurer, and I had my opponents come up to me. And, a lot of these people in politics say they want newcomers and outsiders and business people. That's all baloney.
No,
they don't want any competition. But there were some nice ladies there who liked my background. They liked that I was a newcomer. They helped me along the way. And so that journey began. And so winning that treasurer's office, and you go to all 15 counties doing it, you meet people in every county, and there's leaders in every county, and there's, hecklers and people that want to, poke you in every county. But you do learn a lot about what's important, not only to the party, but to the people beyond the primary. So I enjoyed that very much, and I think it prepared me to run for governor uniquely. It was interesting, if you remember, Jeff Flake was the congressman from Mesa. Jeff Flake was kind of Tea Party before Tea Party. He had killed earmarks, if you remember.
And he used to put out that pork book later on where he talked about government waste.
Yeah. So he was very well known in conservative circles. He had led the Goldwater Institute. And we went up to Mojave County. I was sitting treasurer, and he was running for the Senate. And he came up and he said, "Can you introduce me to some of these people? I don't know anyone." And that's the difference between a statewide race and a district, is you're in every part of the state. And I noticed that too when I ran for governor. I had some really good competition. That was a tough primary field. But I think having been in those counties, to know what's important to those voters, to understand and respect the rural way of life, and to know that Maricopa County is not the be-all, end-all in this state, and there are 15 counties, and Maricopa is just one of it. One of them is the right way to position yourself if you do want to be governor of all the people.
So let's talk about that, the governor's office, because you talked about the economy and Governor Brewer. I've made the analogy on the air a number of times. Governor Brewer was like the emergency room doctor that had to stabilize the patient. She had to make really rough decisions to get the economy just to stay alive. When you came in, you were more like the specialist, the orthopedic surgeon that puts everything back together. Was it really that much of a plan when you were running, knowing that we need to diversify this economy? I use the phrase intentional growth. Was it intentional from day one?
It was intentional, but it was aspirational. I had some confidence not only that I could win an election, but that the product and the place that I was leading was a very special place. And I had looked at other places that had had success. And this is really this is a business practice called best practices. You look at other people that are doing things right. And if you remember when I was running for governor, I referenced Texas a lot. I mean, what does Texas have that we don't? I don't think they have anything. If anything, I think it's more beautiful here. It's a better quality of life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yet Texas had gone from an oil and gas state to a truly dynamic economy with everything under the sun being in Dallas and Houston. And listen, I've been to Dallas and Houston. I'd much rather live here. So I wanted to be the one to get in front of these decision makers, in front of these CEOs, and make the case. And when I was running, I got in front of Rick Perry, who was then the third-term governor of Texas. And he told me some of his secrets. He was planning to run for president at the time. So he basically gave me his playbook, and it's pretty simple. I mean, show up in the room. You'll differentiate your state immediately if the governor is there. Listen to what their needs are. Tell them what you can deliver. No special favors, but opportunity for all. And I had a special trick where I gave everybody my cell phone number. Nobody ever called it, but it was just kind of that care and attention that they're going to have. And then I'd say, how did your meeting go with Greg Abbott? Well, they hadn't got in front of Greg Abbott in Texas. Or how did your meeting go with Ron DeSantis, or before that Rick Scott in Florida, and they hadn't got in front of them. So I really carved that time out. Every state has an economic development effort. It's typically delegated to one person. We have the best person in the country here in Sandra Watson, and but I wanted to be her partner in that. And then I was also really fortunate with Michael Bidwell. Michael Bidwell was somebody that I didn't know that well before I ran for governor. I think he actually started out the race supporting someone else, but when he saw that vision, he was a Midwesterner as well. He grew up in a little bit different neighborhood in St. Louis than I did in Toledo, but he had relocated to Arizona as well and thought it was an incredible place. So I had the top business leader, I had the greatest Secretary of Commerce in the country, and then as governor, I was able to speak with real authority on what the state could do, and our economy's been transformed, and it was a blast.
And you being able to to parlay and use events like the Waste Management Phoenix Open being a Thunderbird, and when the Super Bowl is here, or the Fiesta Bowl championship games, a time when they're coming, those CEOs are coming here for a good time. That had to be a great advantage for you.
Oh, it's priceless. It's priceless. And it's also part of how I tried to woo Michael Bidwell. You know, whoever was going to be the next governor was going to be inaugurated in early January 2015. And the Super Bowl was 4 weeks later. So I kept talking about how we can use the Super Bowl to brand the state of Arizona, to really paint the canvas of what the state really is and show it off. And it is the biggest event anywhere. Yeah. So I think he liked hearing that. He wanted to be a partner in it. We had the Phoenix Open that was going on at the same time, which is the best pre-party or lead up. And I remember, you know, when you're running for governor, Mike, you go to voicemail a lot.
Yeah.
When you become governor, everybody picks up the phone. So I won the office in November, and all these guys outside of Michael Bidwell's office, they were putting together this program for the Super Bowl. And it just sounded like a snore fest. It was all down at the Biltmore, and it was all these very serious speakers. And I said, listen, this is the Super Bowl. It's a big party, and we have the greatest pre-party leading up to it. So you guys can do what you're going to do down at the Biltmore, but I'm going to be at the Phoenix Open. And I think we should bring everybody that's looking to Arizona to the Phoenix Open. And you mentioned I was in the Thunderbirds at the time. Guys like Dan Mahoney and Tim Woods and David Rao and others were in leadership. Derek Hall in leadership in that group. And they'd allowed us to use those facilities. Of course, everything was properly compensated and done to the letter of the law. But we basically brought people to that setting. And I think they looked out. And I think for every Arizonan that's been a part of that, they know that that's our best week. We really shine, and we're able to see all the other things. But what is, to me, has always been so unique about Arizona is so many people came from somewhere else. Right. And we are a very welcoming and inviting place. I always say there's no good old boys club. There's no status quo. There's no establishment. If you want to run for governor or start a business or do whatever you want, it's wide open. And I think people were able to get that culture through being among people that were really invested in the state, but also seeing everything the state could offer. A lot of people know that the Phoenix Open started as a way to promote the Valley of the Sun through sports by Bob and Barry Goldwater in 1937. I mean, this was a little backwater tournament at Phoenix Country Club. Now it's the most widely attended sporting event in the world. And it was started by local guys here in Phoenix. That's the kind of opportunity that still exists here.
I remember being on 16 and watching the craziness on 16, but it was when the Super Bowl was here, and it was Saturday, and looking out to the east and just watching private jet after private jet after private jet landing at Scottsdale Airport. And I thought, what an opportunity for Arizona. These barons of business from around the world here in Arizona. The weather is absolutely perfect. This tournament is a great party. The Super Bowl, that just seems like, how do you beat it? How does anybody compete with that weekend?
Well, I don't think you can beat it. I think that's where we established ourselves as the premier place to be. I think we've demonstrated it with the evidence of folks that have come here. When I ran for office, I came from the business community. A lot of my business friends said, I'll help you get elected, but my son or daughter who graduated from you name the college can't apply their degree in Arizona. Well, I haven't heard that in 5.5 years. It doesn't matter if you're a software engineer from the finest institution in the nation. There's a job available for you here, and of course our service sector as well. So I think we just need to remember that attitude, to stay humble, to try harder. There's other states that are making headway. Tennessee is doing great things under Bill Lee and Bill Haslam before them. We've seen what Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida and that growth. Of course, what Greg Abbott has done in Texas. So there is a competition among the states. I think Americans vote with their feet. They're very mobile. But once people come here, they want to stay here. And so we want to keep it and protect it and continue to promote it. And I'm hopeful we will.
And no, this is not a slight to any other university university, but what Michael Crow has done at ASU and the transformation of Arizona State, especially while we benefit so much here from the Cronkite School, but what they've done with that engineering program is amazing in what it's done for Arizona.
Michael Crow is a force multiplier for the state of Arizona and for higher education. There's a lot of stuff going on in higher education that really bothers people. Almost none of it goes on at Arizona State. You're always going to have a faction here and there. But Michael Crow was a partner working with Sandra Watson. So companies that came here and liked what they saw, but not only wanted to know about the talent that already existed, and Michael Crow has transformed that university in 2 decades, but also the pipeline of talent that's coming out of Arizona State University. So I give him an immense amount of credit. He came and spoke at the National Governors Association, which I participated in as well, of course.
Well, you participated in. You were the president for a while.
Well, that was the Republican governors. But, you have all the Democrat governors in the country, all the Republican governors in the country. After Michael spoke, I had probably a line of 20 governors standing in line to pick my brain. All the Republicans thought he was a Republican. All the Democrats thought he was a Democrat. I believe Michael's truly independent. His focus has been on Arizona State University. He has excelled at it. We finally now have the right leader at the University of Arizona with Dr. Bobby Robbins down there. And what's going on at Grand Canyon University with Brian Mueller in an entrepreneurial pursuit. So there's not only a lot of things to be proud of that are happening in Arizona right now, but what is our state going to look like 20 years from now? I think that if we have good leadership and sound policies, we'll be in great shape, because that education and the fact that so many of our kids now look to ASU or U of A if they can't get into ASU, then they
there's going to be a shot somewhere.
Well, I had to go 8 years. I said I'll be governor of all the people except for the third Saturday in November, and I'm excited about the state's newest hire, Kenny Dillingham, as head coach as well.
Let's talk about some challenges when you were in the governor's office. Let's talk about COVID.
Yeah.
Criticized by so many people. I was critical of some things like some others were about the decisions, but you were making decisions in real time based on the information you had at the time. Can you just pull the curtain back a little bit about that? Just the process of how you made some of those difficult decisions and how difficult it was to make them.
Well, pressure is a privilege. I mean, that's what you sign up for when you run for governor. You know there's going to be a crisis and that there's going to be a test. I think you imagine it, God forbid, what concerns every governor in the country is every morning are the words active shooter.
Right.
And we were able to avoid that in Arizona by the grace of God. Of course, we deal with wildfires and floods and other things here, but this was unique and it was different. So to pull the curtain back, what my philosophy is I wanted to put the best possible people around the table. I had so-called experts on tap, as Harry Truman would say. Mm-hmm. They weren't on top. Mm-hmm. So I had to make the final decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's the role. That's the responsibility. So I know some people didn't like some of my decisions. It became a very politicized and polarized time. I saw a media that I had somewhat of a relationship with. I think always as a conservative, as a conservative and as a Republican, you're swimming upstream with the media. You're not going to get the coverage you want. They don't think it's great that you made tough decisions and balanced the budget. I just think that's the job that you have to do. But I saw it become politicized. And I really saw, speaking more broadly of the media, that they saw a winning hand in this. They didn't like Donald Trump. They didn't like what he had said about the media. Arizona's a swing state. And so you remember those press conferences.
Yeah. Do you think was that the first time you tasted the vitriol?
I had observed a lot of the vitriol because I traveled with the president and the Vice President Trump and Vice President Pence. So I'd seen that, at different stops along the way. It was the first time I'd seen it in Arizona.
So in that decision-making process, and I mean, you and I have talked about this, what I said was you can never over-communicate in a crisis, and I thought there should have been more communication. Was it intentional in the way that you communicated and when you communicated during that time when people were critical of shutting things down? How planned did all of that have to be? How calculated did you have to be?
Well, listen, we were doing the press conferences quite often. Now, the media wanted a press conference every day, but what I wanted to do was, as there was a change, as there was new information, as there were different decisions, but we were certainly on air and communicating more during that time, I would say by a tenfold factor to be conservative than what happens in traditional times.
The complaints from the business community, and a lot of it was the small business community that felt like we should have never shut down at all, and they were critical of you. These were people that literally helped get you elected in a way because they were such strong supporters of the economy, became critics in a lot of ways because they were losing so much. Did you ever,
Mike, our state, the way our state came out of COVID was top 3 in the nation.
Agree.
And the media accused me of having a tremendously light touch and didn't think I was doing anything when other governors were making very harsh decisions. We did have mitigations in terms of things like restaurants going to 50% capacity indoor, but expanding and removing all the zoning outdoor. So it was a way for people to enjoy a product or service and still respect what at the time was unknown. I think if you look back in hindsight, so much of what we were told about COVID from the so-called experts in Washington, D.C. was just wrong. So really erring on the side of protecting life, but also prioritizing individual liberties. And there's a reason everybody was coming here from California. All the baseball leagues, all the soccer leagues, all the kids' sports. Our focus was more on folks 65 and older that had underlying health conditions, and that turned out to be the right call.
Yeah, and I wasn't second-guessing the decision. What I was asking is, there was a unique group now that had been largely your biggest supporters that were coming to you with criticisms. And I just wondered if that was something, what that was like talking to those business owners.
Well, we did a conference call, and the press always finds out about these conference calls, and they call in. So there's so much you can do in a press conference, and you remember a lot of the questions.
Sure. I do.
Comparing, why aren't you doing what Gavin Newsom or Andrew Cuomo's doing?
What was the one with Howie Fisher that asked about showing up naked somewhere? I thought you handled that one pretty well.
Well, let's go back to the conference calls. So we would have an open line to all the small business owners in the state, and they could call in. We'd give them the overview of what was happening, and then we'd open the line. And I think we made a lot of good, measured, targeted decisions with that feedback. But like I said, there was no way you're going to please everyone during COVID, and that was really never my focus. I wanted to do the right thing. I think if you were trying to win COVID from a political standpoint, you were doing the wrong thing. But I didn't criticize other governors.
Right.
I just said I'm going to do what's best for Arizona.
Well, one of the things I saw from my observation was you had a line to walk with COVID, and you were in a no-win situation. The other no-win situation really was what it turned out with the election, with the certifying the election, because for a long time,
that was a lot easier.
Well, but the criticism became you were. The President of the United States had taken you to Washington, or had you come to Washington, D.C. to do a one-on-one and talk about what a great governor you were. And then all of a sudden it seemed like he was putting a target on your back. What was that time like?
It was... It's hard to describe what the time was like. I had a wonderful relationship with President Trump. I worked as hard as any other governor in terms of supporting him and trying to make sure Arizona went his way. At the end of the day, Arizona was lost. And my job was to follow the Constitution and uphold the law. So I think in many ways, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on that decision, of course, but that was the right thing to do. That was the lawful thing to do. And if there was evidence, and at the time I was very open-minded to evidence, I was having a lot of conversations with President Trump and more so with Vice President Pence, there would have been no standing for the administration to bring evidence forward in a court of law until the election was certified. So that was part of the plan, that there would be certification and then evidence would be presented.
Have you had follow-up conversations, and I'm not going to ask for privileged information, but have you had conversations following with President Trump after all that happened?
We had several conversations before. I think the day of the certification was our last conversation, but we did talk post-certification and had a very cordial relationship. If you remember, Rudy Giuliani was in town at the same time, and he didn't think certification was the right thing to do. He was in town supposedly to deliver evidence that was never forthcoming. And at the same time, if there was evidence, I wanted to make sure that there was proper adjudication and visibility to it. So a lot of discussions post that signature with Vice President Pence and that team that was going to present that evidence.
When you look... from my perspective, watching our party and the infighting that happened in the division based on just that one issue, you either believed the election was stolen or you didn't, and that was it. How did that make you feel? I was so disillusioned by that. Were you as well at the anger within our party and the vitriol?
Well, I don't think in a position of leadership you can be disillusioned. You just have to continue to plow forward, and you have to communicate. And I thought there was really no more audible thing that I could do to demonstrate my confidence in Arizona and our ability to do elections than to certify that and to stand by that certification and then go out into the public square. I am concerned in other states what happened in places like Nevada. You know, they proactively mailed all of those ballots with no decision from the legislature, and you had so many live ballots floating around. In Pennsylvania, they did things like the Supreme Court made a decision that they would accept ballots after the date that was prescribed in law. And all of that played into that narrative. So I do think that those things needed to be chased down. And if people had evidence, they needed to present that. And I'm a big believer in free speech. I don't want to limit what you say. Mm-hmm. You can say something that you believe. You can say something that's your opinion that I disagree with. You can even say something that's not true. So all of that is out there, but I thought through that discussion and debate, we should find a way to move forward. I don't know that we have yet. I do think if you look at what happened in Arizona in 2022, you had candidates that were looking backwards, beating a drum about 2020. Those candidates lost. Candidates that were talking about what was next and what they were going to do, those candidates won. And I think it's very important that leaders present a vision of where they want to drive the state. I think that's what Americans and Arizonans want to hear, but this is an issue that simply has not gone away.
And that's the thing for me, is that we still have people that are looking back and what that's going to mean going forward.
You know, I'm out in public a lot.
Yeah.
I've always been out in public a lot, but I'm out in public a lot now with no security, DPS, driving myself, and and all that good stuff. And I love that. And I've been in a number of situations where people have come up to me one-on-one, and this has been their issue. And I've talked through, you know, what I saw, mm-hmm. what I did, what I knew. And oftentimes what I've heard is, I've never heard that before. They're only hearing one side to the story. And I do think if you do your own personal deep dive into this, you'll come to the conclusion that there were some things that were wrong that happened across the country, but it wasn't enough to overturn the election, that Arizona does these elections very well. And there were a lot of people on President Trump and Vice President Pence's team that was calling into Arizona's governor's office to get all the tough questions answered. And at the end of each one of these discussions, one was with Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, one of the richest men in the world and an expert in data. And after he got all of his questions answered on Arizona, I'll never forget, he said, I don't even know why I'm talking to you. This is what every other state in the nation should be doing to ensure election integrity. And I said, well, make sure you tell President Trump that.
And do you think he did?
Oh, I think he did for sure.
So with your experience, do you now have potential candidates coming to you for advice about how to run campaigns? And what do you say to people that do reach out and want to ask you?
Well, the answer is yes. And I kind of took that pay it forward lesson from John Kyle. if somebody's serious and they're a person of goodwill, I'll sit down with them and have coffee, try to find out why they're running for office, what their intention is, and then I'll open up the playbook of what I did. Of course, the playbook changes in this business, although, the guy with the most votes wins. So that was always my mindset, is I want to win every Arizonan. I want to persuade everyone that I can, every room that I want in. I enjoyed that very much. And, before I met with John Kyle, I wanted to get with Fife Symington. I'd never met Fife Symington. He was, when I moved back to Arizona, he was the governor. And I liked his background in business. I thought he saw what I was seeing in the state, that it could be a great place to live and a great place for great companies to come. And I was able, through mutual acquaintances, get a lunch with him. And I said, hey, Governor, listen, I really admired your administration. I was just building Cold Stone at the time, but I want to run for governor, and I want to get some advice from you. And you know what the first thing he said to me was?
What?
He said, you got to get your head around losing, because you probably will. This is a tough business, and very few people are successful the first time they do it. And he goes, and to me, this sounded like bad advice. I said, wait a minute, isn't this like, kill or be killed? I win, they lose. And he said, well, for a lot of people it is. And if that's your mindset, you'll do and say stupid things. He said, I checked you out before we did this lunch, and these are his words. He goes, you have a pretty good reputation and a lot of positive relationships with people. And you may not win, but that doesn't mean you can't run again. You'll be smarter. And I remember as that primary, I think you actually moderated one of the tougher debates at the end.
There were nine of you.
I wasn't winning at that time. And I knew that. I'd gone home that night for dinner. This is before that final debate. And I said to my family, that was July 27th of 2014. I was in second place. And I said, you're not going to see a lot of me this next month. You're welcome to participate in whatever you want. And I want to win. I'm going to leave it all on the field. But if I don't, I'm going to call the winner, and I'm going to concede that evening. I'm going to go to the unity breakfast that next morning, and then I'll find another way to serve, and it may not be in public life. But I was fortunate that I did get over the finish line. But I think that mindset of being able to live with losing, because it's important who our elected leaders are. But this reminds me of a story with my niece, Kate. My brother said I had to call her after the 2016 election, and I said, why? And he said, well, she's not coming to Thanksgiving dinner. And I said, why isn't Kate coming to Thanksgiving dinner? And he said, well, she's not going to sit down and eat with people that voted for Donald Trump. So I called Kate and I said, hey, there's been a lot of people that have won the presidency that I didn't agree with. And the first political shock for me was Bill Clinton beating George H.W. Bush. But, my life had been pretty good. Cold Stone had been pretty successful.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly important who the president is, but your life can still be happy and successful and flourishing, even if you don't like who won the election.
Yeah, and I from my perspective along those lines, I remember when Barack Obama got elected, and then when he was running for re-election, I was so amazed that he beat John McCain. I really thought, personally, I thought McCain was a much better candidate. But when he was running for re-election, the mantra was, if we re-elect Barack Obama, we're going to lose America, and we're never going to be the same again, and we'll never get our country back. And I thought, hang on a minute. We're America. No one person is going to change it. And then 18 months after Donald Trump was the president, we had an economy like we had never seen, proving that no one person is going to make that much of a dramatic change in this country.
Amen. And listen, I invest a lot of time and energy in these elections, and I care deeply about the country and who wins these races. But I do think we need to pick ourselves up and go forward. I like to say, there are no lost causes, because there are no gained causes. We've been having this fight for nearly 250 years. That's what you do in a free country. I do think the Democratic Party has gone somewhat radical left. And some of this discussion of people wanting to rewrite our history or tear down our economic system, this is wrong, and this needs to stop. But we need to win these offices to get that done. And the one thing I'd say about the McCain race in 2008, because that's the first time I was really close to politics, you said that McCain was the better candidate. I would say that McCain was the better American. McCain had had a life of real world experience. And here Barack Obama was somebody that was telegenic and could give a speech, but really hadn't done much before that. And that had to be so bitter for John McCain, yet he showed none of that.
None.
He gave that concession speech out to Biltmore that evening. He went home, released the Secret Service security, got up early the next morning, went and bought his own Starbucks, ran for re-election, and he served in office till the day he left us. And I thought it was a great example of a cause greater than oneself, because it had to be very hard to see someone like a Barack Obama in contrast to Senator McCain's life and experience, and the fact that his father was an admiral, his grandfather was an admiral. Have you ever been to Hawaii, where the USS Arizona?
I've never been to Hawaii.
You got to get to Hawaii, where the USS Arizona is. And in that picture, when the Japanese are having the unconditional surrender, John McCain's father is standing on that deck. His
sense of humor, as long as we're talking about Senator McCain, he was very kind to me for years and was better than he should have needed to be toward me. And I remember him in the studio talking about losing that election, and he said, somebody asked me, have you heard the joke, how I slept?
Yeah.
And he said, like a baby. I woke up every 3 hours crying. And I thought, for him to joke about such a bitter loss was just told a story about who he was.
He had a lot of good jokes.
He did.
He was fond of telling them often, but they always got a laugh, and nobody got a bigger kick out of it than them. And that's when I was running for treasurer in 2010. That was after the 2008 defeat, and when he was running for Senate.
Yes.
Bitter primary against J.D. Hayworth, if you recall that. And when you're running for office, Governor Brewer had the state plane. She decided who gets on the state plane. She was kind enough to invite me on that state plane to campaign all over the state, and sure enough, John McCain was sitting across me each time, and I've never gotten on that plane my entire 8 years as governor, not thinking of our conversations when I was a newcomer, a nobody from nowhere, and I saw also the zest and joy he took in campaigning. I never saw the Beatles or Elvis Presley, but I did walk into a VFW in Bullhead City with John McCain post the defeat in 2008, and these are guys in wheelchairs, guys with no arm, and their Budweisers under the arm, and they loved John McCain. He was truly in his element. He had all kinds of jokes for everybody outside of the naval service.
You can't.
And so I was literally sitting there watching all these veterans who had given so much to the country and their reverence for John McCain, wondering, how did our nation select someone other than him?
Right. And that wasn't even a slight against Barack Obama. But it was interesting because going to his office in D.C., and he always made time for me. Like you said, he made time for me. We sat in his office, and he had his feet up on the table in his office in D.C., and he was pointing out things around the room that people had given him. And he had all those pictures, those photographs that were taken by Barry Goldwater that Barry Goldwater had signed.
Yes.
And he had such great stories to tell, and he had such a reverence for the country. He talked about his time in Vietnam and in the Hanoi Hilton with a smile on his face, and saying some of the greatest relationships he ever had were made in that place. And I thought, I wonder if I could ever have that good of a perspective on so many tragic things that happened to me. But that's how he treated me, and that's how the attitude he exuded.
They're remarkable stories. Every Arizonan and every American should know these stories. There's no one in public life that has that kind of experience of service and sacrifice. And I agree 100% on what you said there. And he did make time. One of the fun stories that I have from us campaigning, he was known for being a hard worker. And J.D. Hayworth gave him a heck of a run in that primary, but he was going to win that general election. And we had been campaigning all over the state. It was myself, Governor Brewer, him, and a couple others on that plane. And we were coming into what's called the Unity Dinner. Mm-hmm. And treasurer doesn't have a body man, but the senator does. And the body man came up and said, okay, Governor Brewer, you speak at 6:07 and you'll be done at 6:11. Senator, you start at 6:11, you'll be done at 6:16. Everybody else gets 1 minute. And people wanted to go home. Everybody was hot and sweaty and needed a shower. And John McCain said, listen, nobody leaves early. These are our best supporters that are here. You stay till the last supporter leaves. And he didn't even have a race. We were getting off the plane, and there was a guy there in a wheelchair who said, hey, I was with you when we opened up the Payson Republican headquarters 30 years ago. Do you remember? Now, I don't know if he remembered or not, but he said, sure, I remember. And he said, well, what are you doing tomorrow, Senator? And he said to his body man, what am I doing tomorrow? And they said, you're busy all day. He said, what am I doing tomorrow? And they said, you're busy all day. And he goes, what are the events? And he said, what do you want to do, Senator? And he said, I want to go to Payson for this rededication. So the next day after this whole thing, he went up to Payson to rededicate the Republican Party headquarters there. And as the veteran one on his way, he looked at his body man and said, make sure we get an easy way up there.
Yeah.
So, but he was going to do that because that's what he thought the duty called in terms of his relationship and leadership in the party and in the state.
I'm so glad we're talking about the senator. When the VA scandal happened, and it happened here, it broke in Arizona first. I started to reach out to members of the congressional delegations on what can we do, to members of the Republican delegation. And Senator McCain's office said to me, the senator has said he will clear his schedule and do whatever you need to do. And I said, well, I'd like to do a press conference or something and kind of expose this. And then from there, his office got the Burton Barr Library. They put out a press release with my name as the headline saying that I was doing this. He showed up with me on a stage, and I asked the veterans in the crowd to raise their hands. Have you waited 30 days to see a doctor, 60, 90? And it wasn't until we got to almost a year before a significant number of hands went down. And the senator's face was so red with anger. And
I've seen that face.
Yeah. And he was so upset and said, we're going to do something about this, and worked really hard. His heart for the men and women that served, I think, led the way in everything he did. And I just hope that that's the legacy for John McCain, that he loved this country so much and he loved the men and women that served it.
Well, I was blessed to have seen him in a lot of different settings. And of course, a guy that's as successful in politics as he was, I mean, he was our party's nominee. But it was in those veteran setting where he was most comfortable and most at ease. And
most loved.
Yes. And I can only imagine. But he loved a tough town hall. I mean, I knew who some of his friends were in those town halls, and when the heat was really starting to come up and boil over, he didn't call on his friends. He called on the guy that was hottest about whatever was going on, and he had an answer for him. The guy might not like the answer, but he knew his stuff.
And one of the things I thought was a very good thing in the long run, when he was running against Barack Obama, there was one of those town halls where somebody, I think, was critical of Barack Obama being a Muslim, or they made some kind of a comment, and he stopped the person and said, no, and corrected him, and said he's not going to go down that road. And I thought, in the world of politics where it's kill or be killed, as you said earlier, he was going to be someone that was going to do it the right way. And if it didn't work out for him, he'd rather be happy knowing he did it the right way.
One of anyone's finer moments in politics, I think he was a master class of, I'm going to do my best to win this, but I'm not going to compromise my values. And if you think, I was very honored to be able to speak at his memorial at the state capitol. If you remember, they came from Oak Creek in Sedona to the Rotunda. We're here for several days. People lined up for miles in the heat of summer, and then from here went to Washington, D.C., and ultimately the Naval Academy. But that service at the National Cathedral, could Shakespeare have written a script that would have had Barack Obama and George W. Bush, the two people that he was defeated by in his quest for the presidency, eulogize him there? And the place, I'd never seen a service like that. I'd seen, of course, footage of John F. Kennedy's funeral in that same building, but it was just the country mourning, one of its finest. And a great example for everyone in public life.
The only thing that may have rivaled that may have been Reagan's funeral with Margaret Thatcher and Mikhail Gorbachev sitting side by side at Reagan's funeral. But if you're putting him in that same conversation, and I think he deserves to be, that shows what kind of a leader and what kind of a respected leader across the aisle that he really was.
Amen.
So then my last question, because I know we've been keeping you so long. We used to joke a little bit about running for the Senate. What are you doing? Is public life possibly still in your future? Have you left that door open?
Well, I haven't ruled anything out. That's not something I'm pursuing, and I'm not running for the United States Senate. But I've enjoyed my time in public life. I actually think you don't need to be in public life your whole life, and I certainly don't need to be in public life. I've really enjoyed this reprieve. I mean, some of my favorite memories are the ones before I decided to run for public office. But depending on the cause or the person or the purpose, I still consider myself a young man, although the years are getting up there. But I'm open-minded to it, but it's not something I'm pursuing at this time.
Yeah, so you don't have your, like you said, you wanted to run for governor. You're not looking at an office and saying that I want. So is there a part of you that's happy to not be involved in it with the condition that it's gotten into with the vitriol and some of the things that are happening? Are you happy to not be in that dogfight?
Well, I'd say it this way. I enjoyed every day as governor. Some days more than others, right? But I really did. And it flew by. But 8 years, 2 terms. And the way we did it, I mean, it was a very energetic executive branch. I mean, we were on offense every day. So I felt like I left it all on the field. And nothing's easy in politics. And this is different than when I entered in 2014 in the governor's race. But this too shall pass. Fevers break. And I think it's important that good people and young people that want to serve and be in leadership, it's almost like what I see in many ways with our law enforcement organizations. You want good young leaders and athletes and people that care about public safety to go into that role. And we need some of the same thing in our state legislature, in our congressional office. I'm incredibly proud of Juan Ciscomani.
Oh my gosh. What a great guy.
Unbelievable. And Juan worked in the administration for 7+ years. I think he's the star of this freshman class.
Oh my God, without a doubt, nationally.
Yeah. And so there are other Juan Ciscomanis out there, and folks like that can go into leadership, make a difference. My former budget director, Matt Gress, I mean, this guy was making a pretty decent salary. Everybody in state government could be making more elsewhere, but they're in state government for a reason. But when you leave that job of budget director for the entire state to run for state rep, you make $24,000 a year. And Matt's doing that, and he's one of the fine new leaders in that legislature. Ben Thoma's an incredible Speaker of the House. I was blessed to serve with Rusty Bowers in my last 2 years. So there's a lot of good people in public life, but you need to replenish it as well.
All right, so I said last question, but this is really the last question. In my estimation, and I've said this on the air quite a few times, I believe history is going to tell the story in everybody that's been elected to office, and I think history is going to be very kind to you. But your legacy, in my mind, will be the renovation of our economy, the diversification of the economy, and school choice. I think those 2 things will be your legacy. Do you agree? And if not, what do you think your legacy will be?
Well, the legacy's left to the pundits and the press and the historians. Well, I think what you touched on are things that I'm definitely proud of. I think the restoration of our relationship with Mexico while being tough on the border. I, of course, would agree with school choice. The first law being passed, the American Civics Act. Yeah. Before we ever knew what the year 1619 represented, this idea that let's teach our kids proper American history and why we are Americans and what differentiates us. And then I think the lowest flat tax in the nation, 2.5%. Remember when we were kids on Saturday morning, they had the show Wild World of Sports?
Yeah, of course.
We suffered the agony of defeat for 18 months until we had the thrill of victory with our Supreme Court making the right decision on that ballot measure as deceptive, worked with the legislature, with people like Ben Toma and J.D. Mesnard, so that we had the lowest flat tax in the nation. There's nobody else in the country that has made that dramatic of a tax cut while having a booming economy and a huge surplus. Arizona's tax, had that passed, would have been 8%. Today it's 2.5%.
And you raise more money into the coffers. It proves that diversification and widening of the economy actually brings more money into the Treasury.
So, and it took all of 8 years to do that. So it was, thanks for pointing some of it out.
I think it was great. I love this sit down. It is so great to catch up with you. And this is a lot of time to be taken up to do this. So I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Governor. All right, Governor Ducey.